I just make a copy of this. If you're working with a base layer with a photograph to create a digital painting, and you go to the Smudge tool here, right? And then you can actually start smudging things around. Wow, that was like pretty super powerful. The strength was 100. I never smudged 100, usually around 40. That's kind of crazy too. That's like way too high. So whatever, different brushes will respond differently to different things, right? So I'm just undoing that. I've just randomly selected a texture brush. So the number one tip, if you're using Photoshop or some of these programs, is you can smudge or paint, and then you can actually smudge with texture brushes. I know most people think, okay, I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna smudge with basically the soft round or the hard round airbrush kind of thing. Okay, there's the spinning wheel of death. Maybe, okay, that's not doing much because now see this brush is reacting different to this smudge. So sometimes I will have to increase the strength based on brush sometimes. And make this a little bit smaller, and then you can come in and you can actually start smudging stuff around here in interesting ways. So that's my number one tip, or first tip here, is don't be afraid to start with a base photo and then start smudging it. The cool thing in Photoshop is it has this like unknown feature, like people know about it, but most people don't, is this finger painting right here. So you can click on finger painting, and you can pick a color. And finger painting is available with the smudge, right? So I'm going to zoom in here. And you have your smudge selected. You've got finger painting on. You pick whatever color you want. And you'll see it'll take that color and kind of finger paint and smudge it into the photo. So that's kind of like a kind of interesting tip that some people don't know about, right? So you can go around and you could basically go pick different colors that you could go and kind of smudge that, and then uncheck the finger paint and then smudge around. And you can have lots of fun kind of exploring and smudging that way, right? So, and then that layers on top of this layer. So I always work in layers. So you can see pretty quickly, you can start creating some sort of abstract image or some sort of image for the background. Another tip I would give you if you're using a base layer as a photo to create like a photo kind of wash in the background, don't be afraid to go to the smudge and go and smudge very bigly, bigly is not even a word. It will take a lot of computing power if you're super high in the strength in your smudging, but basically you could do like small little motions like that where you kind of move it around. Now the spinning wheel of death, because this can be a lot of computing power depending on how big your Photoshop file is. And once this is done, it's going to give a nice kind of soft smudge look to it, and you could just kind of smudge around and create like kind of an abstract image with that, right? Be known, you can see now if your smudge brush is too big and the strength is too much, it's going to be a lot of computing time here spinning around waiting for that to smudge up. But those are some kind of basic painting techniques you can do right over top of a photo if you're thinking about it. I like highlighting the finger paint option. But hopefully this is valuable information for you. If you are like, hey, how do I smudge and create kind of like an interesting thing as a base coat background with a photo and it doesn't spin like that, I would tell you, I'm going to make another copy of this. Go up to filter and you can blur it, right? So my favorite blurs, you could do like a motion blur or a Gaussian blur. Those are the ones I stick with the most. They're fast and they're not super intense on your computer. So you could go Gaussian blur, and you could just like throw a Gaussian blur on that really quickly. You could throw a motion blur on that also to highlight it. And then before you know it, you're not spending a lot of time trying to create like something for the background. You've kind of, with some blurs, abstracted the photo and it's giving you a base coat to work with. So if I was highlighting other blurs as well, so my 3 favorite blurs in Photoshop are, if you're doing this type of work, Gaussian, motion, and in the blur gallery, field blur is pretty sweet. You can do a lot with that. You actually pin, and you can pin blurs and do different things and kind of blur other areas out. You can get right into certain areas and blur. And yeah. so you can blur certain areas more than other areas. It's a super strong tool. And before you know it, you're doing like a wash, like a base coat wash for your stuff, right? There's other features in that, but some of my photo tutorials cover that a little bit more. So there you go. So now you've gone from that and you kind of had an abstract kind of background there, right? So my recommendation all the time is, as you're painting, think about working in layers. So make a layer number 1, right? And I'm going to go to my paintbrush here. I'm going to start with this, with my kind of like base layer here. I might draw some really bad cartoon character. I'll probably lower the opacity a little bit so it's not too harsh of a black line. And then you can start drawing in a character, right? I'll just do some sort of weird alien. I told you it's going to be bad. I'm drawing with my finger on my like pad here, so this is awful. This is even more terrible than I thought, if that's humanly possible. But anyways, here you go. Thanks, Rob, for like making me look like a really bad illustrator. I'll just make it so bad you don't even know what to do. There you go. Okay. And then you have that kind of like basic coat in, and then I would zoom in. I would never stay, like if I'm trying to develop a drawing, I never stay fully out. I never fully out in full widescreen window mode. I'm always zoomed in, right? I find that when students make the mistake, they think they can do a lot from this distance. You need to kind of be zoomed in. And so you have your base layer there, and then you could start building in like another layer on top of here, right? So let's say, for instance, I want that opacity up a little bit higher now, and I would start shading. Like I would actually start by doing my neutrals, right? So I'd start throwing that in. Like if I had to think of a light source, first of all, try the wrong direction. So if I went over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a layer here. Always think about that. I'm going to go light source, LS, right? So my light is coming from here. So that means I need that to be lighter, and then as the shadows fall back here. But it's always good to be planning out your light sources, to have like that in there, and you can turn that off and on, right? So go back to my other shaded layer here, and then start shading in your blacks, right? Get it in as a base, and then you could go to the smudge, lower that size because that was way too big. I use the bracket key beside the P key. That's where I'm doing it. That's the quick key. And then basically I tell students you can start smudging in, you can start smudging around this stuff, right? So don't forget about the smudge. And then you can also lower the opacity here a little bit to like move that in, and then you start building your layers up, right? The other thing that students don't consider is you've got this in, and then you think, okay, with the towel I got to get it all perfect, but you can still erase this area here, your painted area, right? Now I'm only going to talk about erasing because a lot of you are using apps and Pixlr. But in Photoshop, there's this thing called masking that's way more powerful than erasing. But let me know if you want a masking demo at some other point. I feel like that's just going to convolute the conversation. But I always use masks. I don't use erase. But I know your apps out there will not have masking. So I'm going to go to the erase tool here, lower that opacity. And I always tell students, similar to Smudge, you're not locked into your erasing brush just being this brush. You can pick a textured eraser if you need to, whatever that is, right? But you can extend everything you're doing here. So boom, erase, and then I can actually shade with the eraser. Don't be afraid to do that. So if I'm going in here and I'm trying to shade this area here, do my base coat, shaded area, go in there, smudge it around. If you need these edges, shade a little bit more. You can always erase into it a little bit and keep lowering the opacity, like use the opacity to kind of like get that shade going, right? So there's that technique, right? So the eraser and the smudging. And then if you have this on its own layer here, and you're like, how do I get a little bit more subtle? You can go up, because now it's on a separate layer, you can actually blur that shaded spot with a Gaussian blur would be my recommendation. So do a Gaussian blur. You can actually shade that more, a little bit touched up with a blur here. Something a bit better. Hit OK. And then you can shift the layer around here. If you don't like that line right there, you move that over. You can then go back into your smudge, and you can smudge that away, right? And then you kind of get that decently shaded into this area here, right? So that's on there and that's on there. And then you want those two parts to come together a bit more. What I would do is I would right click and then I would merge that down. I would merge the layers together. So I'm going to collapse those layers. So now that layer's on this layer here. I'd zoom in a little tighter and then I'd go to my smudge. And I would smudge this stuff away and kind of with the smudge tool, fine tune my shading in here. Like that, right? So that's kind of some shading tips. It's not perfect, but I'm trying to use my fingers and whatnot. But essentially what I would do is I would get my shading built in like this. There'll be other people out there like, sorry, I would get my shading built in with my neutrals. Other people on YouTube will have different techniques. You have to just pick and choose and you'll find the way that you want to work. How I work is I build up my neutrals first. Then if suddenly I wanted like some green in the face, I'd make like a layer here. And this is my alien. So I'm going to go and pick like some alien looking green color. Go OK, go to my brush, and then start base coating that green in some way, right? Like that. You can move this down below that, right? You can move it above it. You could start using your opacity here to like kind of blend things together if you need to, like a little bit more or less, right? There's tons you could be doing. So there's my green coat behind him or her or it. And then smudge away here, right? The other tip I give people is like, say you want a darker area on this green, you can go into the dodge and burn area. So burn will darken. So if I want to darken this, I can just go and start darkening right on that. I find it's easy to lose control with the dodge and burn, but it is a technique that you'll see some people utilize on YouTube. I'll show you a technique that I prefer, but there is, if you are wanting this, you can go and dodge basically, or burn this area of your green. And then that's tinting that a little bit more into the black over here. You can also, dodge does the opposite, it lightens. So you want to lighten an area. So dodging and burning also save you a lot of time in trying to figure out how to tint things. So with your smudge tool, you know about finger painting now, right? You've seen kind of like some blurring techniques for blurring and smudging and erasing techniques to kind of like, what was that? To shade things together. And another shading technique is you can basically make a color and you can dodge and burn that color to create highlights and shadows within just one color, base color, right? Those are kind of some tips for you to explore and think about. The other technique that I prefer over dodging and burning is I will make a blank layer, right? I will set that to maybe like a darker green here. Go to my brush tool here. So if that's a darker area, I can throw in this dark area here, and then I can change the blending mode to soft light. And the soft light just kind of tints that ever so slightly. I prefer that over dodging and burning. It's making soft light layers over top of your colors and then merging those together. So if you've got that soft light layer, you can see it's like a nice kind of tint or shade right into there. You don't have to do much work to it. You could go into the smudge and you could smudge that around if you're needed. And the soft light layer is what I use pretty much 90% of the time if I'm painting, if I need something tweaked. Then I'm going to right click, I'm going to merge that down there. And there you go, I'm shading that already, right? And then the opposite for the soft light layer is if I want to lighten something, I go in here and I would pick like a lighter green tint. You just go to your brush and you base coat that. You throw that on there. You throw that on. It could be overlay if you want to look something more like acidic, or soft light. Soft light's my go-to. And then you see just with soft light, you've shaded that area there. You can lower the opacity if you need to, and you can smudge and erase that as needed, right? I'm smudging that, and then I could just go to erase. I'll erase things around. And then again, right click, and then I can merge those layers together when I'm done. Right on. So there you go. I'm going to go back to the Google Meet here.